Ever feel like some books just really stick with you? You know, the kind that pop into your head years later?
Oh, absolutely.
We're tackling one of those today, Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. It's a book that's celebrated and maybe even feared a little bit for its depth, but
Yeah.
don't worry, we're diving deep so you don't have to. And it's a deep dive worth taking, wouldn't you say? I mean, To the Lighthouse consistently lands on those best of lists. It's
Yeah.
like it's earned a permanent spot in the Literary Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
What is it that makes it such a standout for you?
Well, just imagine a novel where the plot isn't about like what's going to happen next, but it's really about what's happening inside the characters' minds.
Ooh,
That's To the Lighthouse in a nutshell.
I like that.
Woolf takes something as, I don't know, universal as a family vacation and turns it into this really profound exploration. Love, loss, the passage of time.
Okay, so we're not talking about a beach read here. But that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. And speaking of fascinating, this book is like swimming with a technique called, and I always struggle to say this one, multiple focalization. It's like Woolf gives us this like X-ray vision into each character's thoughts, you know?
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like she hits pause on the external action, and then she just lets us eavesdrop on these internal monologues.
Yeah.
Like if you think about when young James, he's desperate to visit the lighthouse, and his dad says no.
Oh, yeah.
We experience his childish disappointment firsthand. But then we shift to Mrs. Ramsay, who's trying to keep the peace and understand her husband's perspective.
It's that constant dance between different viewpoints that makes it so captivating.
Exactly.
It kind of reminds me when you watch a movie and the camera just lingers on someone's face after something big has happened.
Yes.
You're getting all this emotion without, any words being spoken.
Right, exactly. And Woolf was part of this literary movement modernism where writers were all about breaking the mold. Think James Joyce's stream of consciousness. Basically, diving deep into a character's thoughts, almost like a jumbled inner voice.
Yeah.
Woolf takes that idea and runs with it, giving us this incredibly intimate portrait of a family grappling with these big, universal feelings.
So it's not just a random technique. It's her way of like tapping into something essential about the human experience.
Yes.
It's like we all experience the world through our own individual lenses. Right.
Precisely. And that's what makes her work so relatable, I think, even if you're not, a literary scholar.
Now, I know we said the plot isn't the main course here, but even a glimpse into the Ramsay family is enough to leave you wanting more.
Right, and this is where those autobiographical elements start to seep in. We'll explore this more later on, but it's worth noting that Woolf, she drew really heavily on her own family and her childhood experiences in crafting the Ramsays, which adds this extra layer of depth to it, this sense that we're tapping into something deeply personal and profound.
Oh, for sure. So picture this. A summer house perched on the rugged Scottish coast.
And not just any coast. I mean, this setting was hugely inspired by Godrevy Lighthouse in Cornwall, a place Woolf frequented as a child.
Wow.
It was practically a second home to her. Imagine like the salty air, the sound of crashing waves, and that looming lighthouse in the distance.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It's almost like that lighthouse becomes a character in itself.
Right.
This silent observer to all the drama and emotion unfolding within those summer house walls.
Absolutely. And that sense of place, that connection to Woolf's own life, it just kind of seeps into every page. It's like you're right there with the Ramsays, feeling the weight of their history and the beauty of their surroundings.
Speaking of the Ramsays, can we talk about Mr. Ramsay for a second? Because, wow, talk about a complex character.
Right. He's brilliant. He's demanding. He's deeply flawed. And again, you can't help but see shades of Woolf's own father in him.
I'm already getting the sense that even the smallest details in this book are like hiding something much bigger.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
All right, listeners, buckle up because we're about to navigate the choppy waters of part 2, where Woolf throws us a curveball in the form of time itself. Remember how we were just talking about that looming lighthouse? Well, in part 2, it's almost like the house itself steps into the spotlight, becoming this like silent narrator as time marches on. Have you ever gone back to a place after years away and it's like the walls are whispering secrets?
It's remarkable, isn't it? Woolf uses this technique called a displaced narrator to create that feeling. She shifts away from those intimate thoughts we saw in part 1 and gives us this broader perspective on how time changes everything. The house observes the changing seasons, the slow decay of the physical world, and even the impact of World War I on the family, all with this like eerie detachment.
And then there are those gut-wrenching losses that occur in this section. Mrs. Ramsey, Prue, Andrew. It's heartbreaking, but Woolf doesn't dwell on the grief directly. It's like she's mirroring how life, in a way, just keeps moving forward.
Absolutely. It's a bold move that forces us to confront the relentless nature of time. Those losses are woven into the fabric of the house, almost like scars that tell a story.
It's definitely a section that makes you think. When I first read it, I wasn't sure what to make of it, to be honest. It felt so different from the vibrancy of part one, but it's one of those sections that has really stayed with me.
And think about how this ties back to the autobiographical elements we discussed. Woolf lost her own mother when she was young, and she grappled with those feelings of loss and change throughout her life. Part two almost feels like her way of processing those emotions, exploring how time can both heal and wound.
This makes me want to go back and reread it with fresh eyes, knowing how deeply personal this section was for Woolf.
I think you'll find it even more powerful on a second read. Those seemingly disparate events start to feel connected by this invisible thread of time and loss.
Okay, so part two leaves us with this sense of time passing, of loss and change, but then we jump forward 10 years into part three. It's like returning to a familiar room, but everything feels slightly off, right?
Exactly. The focus shifts back to the individual characters, Lily, Mr. Ramsey, James, Camilla, and we see how they've all been shaped by the passage of time, by those losses we witnessed in part two.
And Lily, she's still wrestling with that painting she started back in part one, the one of Mrs. Ramsey and James. It's almost like she's trying to capture time itself on that canvas.
That painting becomes this tangible link to the past, wouldn't you say? It's fascinating because Woolf herself was a painter before she was a writer, and she saw a deep connection between the two art forms. It's like she's using Lily to explore her own creative process, her own struggle to translate memory and emotion into art.
Which, now that you mention it, is another example of how those autobiographical elements are woven throughout the entire novel.
It's like she's inviting us to decode those connections, to see how her own life experiences fueled her artistic vision.
Okay, so remember how that hoped-for trip to the lighthouse was a source of so much tension in part one? Well, guess what? They actually go.
That's almost anticlimactic in a way, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We've waited this whole novel for them to reach the lighthouse, and when they finally do, it's not about the destination, but about the journey itself.
And the relationships, like that moment between Mr. Ramsey and James where he finally acknowledges his son's efforts. Chills. I'm not sure I've ever wanted a father and son to connect more in all my life.
It's such a powerful moment of reconciliation after years of unspoken tension. And it highlights one of the novel's central themes, how our relationships, like ourselves, are constantly evolving over time.
And Lily, she seems to finally have some sort of breakthrough with her painting, right?
Right. It's like she finally understands that the act of creation is more important than any lasting legacy. That sometimes it's the process, the struggle, the journey that matters most. It's a message that resonates far beyond the world of art, don't you think?
It's interesting how that idea of the journey being more important than the destination plays out in both the novel itself and in Lily's painting.
Exactly. It's like Woolf is saying that life isn't about reaching some, grand finale.
Yeah.
It's about embracing those messy, imperfect moments along the way.
And finding meaning in those moments,
Yeah.
even the ones that are, marked by loss and change.
Precisely. And that brings us back to something we've kind of touched on throughout this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
The deeply personal nature of Woolf's writing.
Right. It's impossible to ignore those autobiographical elements, especially when it comes to, the characters and the setting.
And that's what makes To the Lighthouse so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's both a deeply personal story and a universal exploration of, the human condition.
So as we prepare to say goodbye to the Ramseys and their, evocative summer home,
Right.
I have to ask, what's the takeaway for our listeners? Why should this book matter to someone picking it up, for the first time today?
Because it speaks to something timeless within us, I think. We've all experienced the complexities of family dynamics, the sting of loss, the passing of time.
Yeah.
And Woolf captures those feelings with such raw honesty and lyrical beauty.
She really does paint with words, doesn't she?
She does. And she challenges us to look at our own lives through a different lens, to appreciate the power of memory, the elusiveness of truth, and the importance of connecting with the world around us.
I love that. It's like she's giving us permission to slow down, to pay attention to the small details and to find meaning in, the everyday.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message, no matter who you are or what your story is.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to ponder.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about the house being like a silent observer in part 2?
Yes.
Well, think about a place that holds like deep personal meaning for you. Maybe it's a childhood home, a favorite vacation spot, or even just like a park bench where you go to think.
Okay, I'm picturing it now.
Now, imagine revisiting that place years from now. How might your perception of that place have changed?
Right.
And maybe even more importantly, how might you have changed?
That's a really thought-provoking question.
It's Something to the Lighthouse really makes you think about the way time shapes not just our memories, but also who we are. It's a book that stays with you long after you've, turned that final page. And we hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for its brilliance.
Absolutely. It's a novel worth revisiting again and again.
And who knows, maybe your own journey through life will give you a whole new perspective on it each time. Until next time, happy reading.